So perhaps all of us in the room, in the cyber room, and in the real room, or it's all real, in the fleshy room, and the cyber room, right? Perhaps we can have just a few moments to settle in the space in which we find ourselves, which is quite different than trying to settle into a space which you'd prefer to have, but you can't find yourself. Right? We just settle into this space. For the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, non-clinging awareness. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I'd like to just start on a frivolous note and an extraordinarily disturbing note. The frivolous note is that most of New Zealand, I'm saying this for the benefit of the people who are joining us in the Zoom from other countries, most of New Zealand right now is glued to a rugby game. Right? So this is kind of the big thing. This is the most passionate and important thing that's going on. At this moment, bombs are raining down in Gaza. Okay? And if you dare to make yourself a bit more aware of this, you might likely to have met with various emotions kind of moving up in your being. Maybe anger. Like, why do they do that? Stop doing that! Or greed, hunger, longing, wanting. Or maybe just kind of numbness, shutdown. Right? And it may be in the process of this that you from time to time realize that these particular reactions or responses are, one, not useful, two, not pleasant for you, and three, perpetuate the kind of root of what's driving all of this anyway. Okay? And I'm not sure that debating about whether it's a legal war or an illegal war, or whether killing these people is allowed or not allowed, is what kind of madness are we getting into? Right? It's possible that the rugby game is a ploy for kind of distracting ourselves from what's going on. Okay? And yet, if you had the opportunity to see that film that I sent an email yesterday, I don't know if you all picked it up, this extraordinary, wonderful, fantastic microscopy film, right, which is just showing miracles. And those miracles are right now happening to everyone participating in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's happening in us in the room. It's happening in the rugby players in France. It's like, there's, it was quite interesting in the film. It said, when you get down to the cellular level, there's not really much difference between a cell in a human body and a cell in a zebrafish. Right? And this extraordinary journey that all of us have taken, right, popped into the world out of seeming God knows whatness, and there's a fertilized egg. And the kind of, in that movie, the kind of the fluidity of the whole thing. And what people don't realize, we look at our large scale, human, one human being, or 3,000 billion cell community. We don't see that. We see one lump, right? It's kind of opaque, does stuff. And yet, if we allow ourselves to explore, we begin to see, and when you're sitting quietly doing absolutely nothing, you're never doing nothing. You can feel like, if your leg goes to sleep, then sometimes you don't know where your leg is. I remember when I was a young child, and I had this extraordinarily disturbing but incredibly insightful experience. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I only had one arm. First of all, I'm not sure if interest came first or fear came first. I'm not quite sure. I can't remember at this stage. And then I thought, well, my rational mind thought, well, I couldn't have lost the arm, but there was no sense of arm, right? So I thought, well, I better find it. And so I remembered that it was attached to my shoulder. So with my arm that I did have, I reached over to my shoulder and I started kind of wondering, where does this thing go? And I'm following it along, and I realized that I'd somehow fallen in my sleep. I got my arm wrapped around in some incredible angle underneath my body and kind of gone to sleep, right? And the feeling was that there was nothing. It was gone, right? And yet, if I just sit here doing nothing in meditation, I don't feel, I can feel my hand is there. I can sense there's a difference between having a leg and not having a leg. Never mind moving it. And, when we start to see these films and we start to educate ourselves as to kind of muscles and tissues and so on, right? We may start to wonder if the perception of existing is possibly, right, a kind of amalgamation of this total dancing fluidity of our organism, right, And it's not just fluid in being what we are, it's fluid in becoming. Right? The nervous system is reaching out. You did see that section where they were using the zebrafish because they're beautiful examples, if you like, for microscopy. They've really tracked the cell development, differentiation, right? As the kind of fish, you can see the spinal cord unfolding in the eyes and the heart beating and so on. And at one point they were focusing on brain cells, right? And how these cells were kind of feeling their way throughout the whole of the body. It looked like a bath loofah. You know you know what I'm talking about? I don't know what to call them other than that. I think it's a dried sea cucumber or something, and people use it to kind of scratch their backs in the bath. And it's kind of this filigree of very, very fine connections, right? And the whole organism, and there's rippling through this are all kinds of messages and so on. Okay? And in the light of this, we might think, what on earth is going on? Okay? I wanted to begin with something trivial and something not so trivial. I've said my piece. I could rant on. I could go on a big rant, but I don't want to spend the whole time ranting on this. I'm certain that for a goodly number of us joining together this morning, this has touched us from time to time in really deep ways. And the question of, well, what can I meaningfully contribute to the cessation of this suffering? Okay? I mean, we're kind of regular donators, if you like, to Médecins Sans Frontières. And they can't even get medical supplies in. It doesn't matter how much money you give to them. They can't do anything at this point. What can you do? And is putting band-aids on it the best we can do? The famous proverbial ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Or could we begin to feel, no, there's this extraordinary opportunity to collaborate with each other and give rise to such a beautiful film that we watched, right? Which was kind of not just scientific, it was kind of artistic, and it was I thought it was really well. Having watched an awful lot of microscopy films, I thought that was quite special, right? And on one hand, we've got people were collaborating from all over the world, right, that went into the making of that film. Like thousands of hours of investigation and so on. People who are wonderstruck by the whole thing. Life. Okay? And then on the other hand, you got this kind of incredible horror. Okay? And, in a way, like the kind of oscillation between these. Instead of the horror being traumatizing in the sense like it freezes us event, it could be a energizer, right? To actually support this wonderful possibility that we have as human beings. So we're in the midst of this work. I think of it as primordial Dharma. Right? It's not Buddhism, it's not a particular religion, it's life coming to know itself. There's just something kind of alive and enlivening about that. Right? Primordial Dharma. Good morning, welcome. And before I come back to this kind of flow of meditation that we've been exploring, I'd like to just make a space to see if there are any observations or questions arising from your practicing, from your living experience, particularly between last month when we met and this month, and just make a space for that, observations or questions and so on, And then if we have any time left over, I'll add a bit more. Yeah. So, Stephen, if you could keep an eye on the screen for me. And so from anywhere, in the room or outside the room. Yes.
Consciousness miraculously creates a sense, a story of this being doing stuff within a situation, which is very useful in terms of driving or crossing roads or earning money or something like that. At the same time, it's a creation in the mind, and you know, men in middle age see a bald patch, and then that causes a sense of dislocation, because there is a sense that this being is the same as he was when he was born, even though there's not a single cell left from that, and yet the sense of it is very strong and tends to dominate consciousness. So my question is simply this: my observation is that it is necessary to have that story in order to function, to recognize you from the cat, for example, and at the same time it's a trap, and the only way around the trap is to recognize it and to be flexible about it and to adapt the story to the situation. Could you comment on that?
Or be translucent about that. You know, I mean, it's possibly already included in it, but it's like, there isn't what trap, right? In the film they hinted at it, but I got interested in their filmmaking, so I looked at their YouTube channel and found other films that they'd made, and one of them was really focusing on disease. And this is not a film for everyone, you know, and it's not to try and convince yourself otherwise, but they were taking the position that at the cellular level there's no such thing as disease. There's just happening, right, that's taking place. So on a certain level there's no such thing as trap, right? There's just happening. And it seems that you know, the process, if you like, of moving from a cell to a kind of mature adult, right, involves what we might call developing a sense of self, right, and a sense of involvement. But then the question is like, is that sense of self a trap, or is it a tool that could be used for, like, to explore further? I will explore. And in the process of the exploring, perhaps we begin to see, like, unless you make the effort, like awareness of your arm and your leg, which is just naturally part of you as an organism. Awareness of your cells is not. Like, we don't, like, you can't, like, grab a cell, you can't see it. You need equipment. You need to be interested in looking at the equipment. Some people say, oh, I'm not interested in cell biology. And you go, well, what are you? It's not, I don't mean like, what are you, like you're lacking because you're not interested, but I'm trying to point out that you are cell biology, right? But we have to take an added step. And for example, wisdom and compassion and all the six parami and so forth, all the qualities that we work with in Buddhism, right, don't just kind of spontaneously happen. You get a lot of spontaneous happening up to a certain point, and then after that it goes, aha, now you've got a functional sense of self which has to participate in the unfolding. And we actually start to tweak the genome. We start to do things with ourselves, right? We participate in it. And you know, it's really difficult to see. And so part of our learning is like learning to kind of first of all, to expand our appreciation of the categories of life. And then expand our capacity to somehow appreciate more than one capacity at a time. Right? So that you're kind of like, instead of just being in this dimension and then that means closed door to that dimension, you can just slowly have a sense of being this kind of unfolding fluidity whilst making a cup of tea and answering the stranger at the door. This is Bodhisattva. It's what we're supposed to be talking about today. Right? So it's just a brief comment. Right? But really everything I would like to speak about today is going to be part of that. Yeah.
I think this might be related to that question as well, but I've sort of had challenges around, I think as part of this kind of praxis and things, is looking at the world, trying to make sense of the world, but in different paradigms. So the paradigm of sort of separation and a paradigm of interbeing, say. And so I think sometimes I struggle a little bit with, I think in order to help me cope with difficulty, I try to make sense of the world by thinking, oh, well, that's separation, or that's interbeing, and I want to try to keep shifting a little bit more towards interbeing. But then sometimes in the doing of that, I'm wondering if I'm kind of, it's not always helpful to kind of discern and separate and categorise.
Yeah, and then what do you do?
Is that trying to realise that flowing that you talk about? Do you know what I mean?
No, go back a bit. You know, you're back in some kind of really crude duality, right? Between a paradigm of separateness, if you like, and an interbeing, and then you're kind of going back and forth, and then you're wondering what to do with it. I'm trying to point out. I said, and then what? Because and then what? What am I going to do with this? Is the process of your organism learning. It's not like, oh, well, over here in this beautiful Samantabhadra Sadhana, we have the answer. It's on page 3, right? You do this, and then you do that, and there's what you do. Actually, when you look down at the cells, could you imagine them? They're going like, do I do an endoderm or an ectoderm or a mesoderm? You know, and which one's what? I've forgotten which one's supposed to be inside the other one. I'm not sure what to do. You know, there's like a huge amount of kind of experimentation. I keep on referring to this film because it gives a kind of dynamism of fluidity, which I think is necessary for our thinking. And there's a part in there where they're tracing the fluidity of the blood flow in the brain. And they're talking about vortexes. It was really beautiful, like rainbow vortexes and the kind of the flow of the thing. And they even showed the cells differentiating to form the intestine. And there was this kind of flow along the outside. It was involuting, and it's kind of like this kind of extraordinary flow. And yet you saw these little dots of color. The whole thing's an artifact of the technology that helps us to see. But from that point of view, everything's an artifact, you know, so we don't have to fuss about that. These kind of dots you see moving, right? And some of them seem to be going like this, and some of them seem to go like this, and there doesn't seem to be any, like if you look down in the dot, you can't really predict where it's going to go. And yet the overall is a kind of a flow that's going, right? And you can imagine like the person say, well, I'm not sure, there's a paradigm of like being the inside of the intestine, and then there's the paradigm of being the outside of the intestine, and then, my God, there's another paradigm of being both, and which one should I be doing, right? And actually, imagine for a moment that question, what should I do? Like is the fork in the road, right? How do I go this way and that way, you know? And that what should I do is us as human talking, conceptualizing creatures verbalizing a process of decision. At a deeper level, there's maybe no verbal process of decision, right? What there is there's a kind of there's this incredible sensitivity. There's a pull here and a push there, and then you're going this way, and then you're going that way, right? And so there's what I'm trying to do is suggest that you could honor your dilemma rather than think the dilemma is a problem and I've got to get onto the right course. Like, and then how do you deal with the dilemma? Like, and part of you use your skills, your current available skills of Dharma, right? Of skills in being held and supported and mothered by situations and circumstances, while simultaneously you are holding and supporting and mothering the rest of the universe in this very situation and circumstance. And sort of, how do you move with that? And so you begin to recognize, I can do this, I can soften, or I can pause, or I can be patient, or I can push, or I can remember a prayer. You know what I mean? We try, and sometimes that kind of frees up and we flow along. And sometimes it raises the question, yeah, but, right? We need to be I'm not saying don't be concerned about yeah buts. You don't want to be paralyzed in yeah buts. But that there's something like cells getting together and collaborating to be in a dilemma. That's pretty amazing, right? So what do I do with it now? Not what should I do with it now. There's a difference between asking the question. We often say, what do I do with it now? But what we really mean is, what should I do with it now? According to Buddhists, or according to wisdom that I don't have. Whereas the question that I'm asking is like, what do I do with it now? Do I lie down and drop dead because it's too confusing? But then I find it's not so easy to lie down and drop dead. You kind of, somehow you're still going. So now what? Oh, I know. I'll go and get a snack. So you go to the fridge and get a snack. There's always a now what, right? But we can become, in a sense, more skilled in, do we need to make the decision, or are we getting more skilled in opening our sensitivity to what's going on that best allows the best summation choice to emerge? And we find our way, and we deepen this is how we deepen our understanding of Dharma. Not by learning what Dharma is, but by, in a sense, becoming more adept at the skill of living, of like this unfolding, evolving, connecting mystery of life.
Something more of a letting go.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe. I mean, I could even imagine someone else would say, you mean a kind of hanging on? And I go, maybe. No, it's not. Letting go is a nice kind of buzzword. We all agree on letting go is supposed to be good. But there may be situations where actually letting go isn't so good. You know, you go, well, I should let go, but I'm hanging on. Why? You know, and then later on, oh, that's why I was hanging on. We make we kind of rationalize what we're doing after the fact and think that we're explaining it. Right? I'd like to any other waving hands for people to speak. Otherwise, we've got a large morning ahead of us, and we can dive right in.
Chen,
Yes.
Darshan?
Yes.
It's Diana.
Hello.
Hi. This question about what to do. For me, this has been coming up all week. And it's been coming up with everything. And it seems like there's just a point where the mind has run out of solutions. The idea of trying to grab at things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still the grabbing that happens. Well, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do this, but it seems to run itself through faster and get to the point of just totally not knowing. And it's like a giving up, but it's not really a head giving up. It's everything giving up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way of avoiding that moment, as painful as it is before it happens. But when it actually happens, it's like you said, there's a pause, or there's some kind of a trust that happens that, well, we've got through this before, but we don't actually know if we're going to get through this time. But what else can you do except just be there, because everything else hasn't worked? And so it's like delving into the depths where you haven't been before. And every time it's a haven't been before. And it might say, oh, well, this worked yesterday. I'll try that. And it's like another attempt to grab at something from an index book of what to do in this situation. And so it gets thrown out. And there's still continually avoiding that moment of not knowing. That happens every time. But once into it, it solves itself somehow without me needing to do anything. Something just comes up that feels more comfortable, that feels more spacious, more relaxed. And it doesn't feel like a solution. It just feels like the next thing.
I wonder if we can have flavors of not knowing. But just to illustrate what I mean, is like we could have not knowing with the flavor of anxiety or despair or love.
Yes.
I'm not talking about the not knowing. If we think love means loving this object or that object, then in the not knowing, all our objects start to kind of collapse a bit. So that kind of love disappears. But I'm talking about a kind of love that's not that. It's something else, right? What on earth does this abiding where there's no abiding mean? I mean, in a sense, we have, how can I put this? It's like the person who's never who doesn't feel supported by a spiritual teaching. I'm speaking in an incredibly ordinary way, like I could say the Dharma, right? And they meet with kind of confusion, not knowing. Usually comes when all of a sudden the situation and circumstance in their life is shattered.
Mm-hmm.
And then because the identity has been totally in that shattered, then there's this kind of nothing, there's not knowing, right? But then for people who are kind of, whether you call it, they kind of have a feeling of a supportive spiritual base, right? I could think in terms of they have a feeling of kind of a supportive Dharma. Then at that point, when we hit that kind of collapse point, we then use our spiritual base, we use our Dharma practice as best we can, right? Not to solve the problem, but to dwell in that space, right? Like to dwell in that place. And you could say that the whole life of Dharma is becoming more and more kind of refined and skilled in this. It's not like, it's just simply it's not useful, I think, to look at the whole universe and say, well, ultimately it's unknowable, it's unpin-downable, and therefore, there's no point. It's too theoretical. We live day-to-day kind of thing. I mean, is our understanding of emptiness supporting me now? Or is my understanding of this practice supporting me? And it doesn't mean that these practices, when they're not supporting us, are meaningless or not. It just means, like, I've got a garage full of tools, you know, things that we need for being on the land. Lawnmower, right? Pair pliers, hammer, chisel, saw, stuff that you have, right? And I don't go out and use all the tools all the time. Some of the tools just sit in there, and you know, I realize, oh, I better put a bit of CRC on them because they haven't been used for such a long time, they're getting rusty, right? But they're kind of there, right? So we got all these different tools, and it doesn't mean that we have to use them. And so if we find a tool's not, you know, I want to hammer in a nail, and I get the saw and trying to whack it with a saw, it's like really hard to hammer in a nail with a saw, right? It's not working, but it's not the fault of the saw. If saws are useless, I'll get rid of the saws. I don't need that anymore. I'll find another religion. I'll find another Dharma path, another spiritual teaching. It's not that, right? But the kind of ability to meet with the impossible, and then in a sense to, you know, this is speaking of rather grimly maybe, but I don't mean it in a grim fashion, surviving it. you meet with the, meeting with the impossible and then discovering that you're surviving it, right? And then you know, moving on. And there's a kind of a learning there which is intangible, you know, sometimes very difficult to put into words except to other people who've had a similar impossible, right? For other people who've had a similar impossible, then you can feel, you can communicate, right? I think what we need to talk about today is exactly addressing all of this, right? And although, you know, in a sense we know we're now working on section 4, right? Bodhisattva Vow, which all of you have been reciting for millions of years, and you know everything about it, and so what's there to be said about that, right? I'd like to just draw attention to the fact that this is a praxis. This is an experimental. What I mean by a praxis, instead of calling it a practice, I'm kind of being picky with just the way we use the words. But I think a lot of people think of practice as like doing something again and again and again until you got it right. You don't need to practice it if you can do it, right? Whereas praxis, when I think of what I mean, and this is just simply the way I understand it. I don't think it's unique, but it's, you might understand it in a different way. We're not haggling over the words, but I'm talking about a kind of an experimental, like somehow learning to experiment with the unknown next moment of our living, right? And then to somehow have the flexibility, learning to develop, cultivating the flexibility to kind of learn and move and grow from that meeting. And so you have practices, skills that you use, but you're using them experimentally. Not as a kind of just a repetitive in, out, breath, anapanasati, right? But it's like, where's this one going? Right? Takes me into, all of a sudden, I thought I was meditating on breathing, and now I'm meditating on feelings. I thought I was meditating on feelings, but now I seem to be meditating on a mind state, right? It's kind of, you have a kind of tool that you're experimenting with, but then the experiment, the nature of an experiment, always means that you don't know what's going to come out of this. If you know what's going to come out of this, it's not an experiment, it's just an action, right? So this is incredibly radical in our culture, the idea that you could live experimentally. that actually the practice of Dharma would be experimental, experientially experimental. Right? So in this sense, we need to, the problem with a sadhana like this is that the words can sometimes just become words. And we kind of rip along through the sadhana, and we don't actually use it as an experiment in here and now living, but rather it's just some kind of thing that we do for an hour every day because it makes us feel good. It's a different kind of praxis. Okay? And so the first section, I want to go right back to the beginning of the sadhana. Right? And the first section of the sadhana was called preparation. And I'm betting that many of you have read that and thought, oh, this is preparation for practicing the sadhana. Here's a possibility that's different. What if this is preparation for seeing Buddha nature? What if this was a preparation for realizing Rigpa? What if this is a preparation for understanding and being the nature of mind, rather than just preparing to do this kind of sadhana? Right? So I've decided to kind of change the language here. I said to cultivate this sadhana of Samantabhadra, let's just say to enter this praxis of living, get rid of all of Samantabhadra and kind of these kind of archetypes. They're symbols of something. The praxis of living, the mystery that isn't finished yet. It's still ongoing. So of course we can't say we've got it together, because there's always the next moment. This is extravagantly different from the way most people in our culture live most of their lives. And yet it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to, at least theoretically, recognize that of course this is what's going on. Of course we don't know what the next moment will bring. Okay? Of course there's unknowing. In fact, to enter the unknowing has got to be entering just the reality. If we think that, oh no, thank God I've got rid of that massive, monumental not knowing, right? Now I can live in conceptual fantasy. So to enter this praxis, arrange yourself in a comfortable posture. And my intention is just to read through the first part of the sadhana, not for us to talk about it, but for you to just let my words be an invitation for a quick mini reconnecting with something experientially. Okay? So to enter this praxis, arrange yourself in a comfortable posture. Okay? Just do what's necessary right now. This is very ordinary language. I'm talking about you arrange yourself. This is a person. This is a paradigm of separateness. Right? We're not jumping into some kind of far out totality or anything. Right? This is very ordinary. Right? Arranging yourself in a comfortable posture. Then making friends with your breathing. Softening through the whole organism. Your entire organism is dancing to the rhythms of your breathing. Can you feel the breathing in your legs? In the palms of your hands? Tides of breathing. Making friends with your breathing, invite your entire body, brain, mind community to settle into a place of pristine stillness, pristine settledness, and vibrantly awake presence. And to help do this, right, you're sitting there, your comfortable posture, we're with the breathing, feeling the breathing, tactile kinesthetic sense of breathing. And we invite our body. What is your body? It's kind of your arms and your torso and your hips and your thighs and your calves and your feet and your head, right? Can you feel that? Invite that to settle. But we also know with this, if we look further, some of us know a little bit about anatomy. We've actually cooked a chicken, right? Eaten a fish, right? And so you have a suspicion that, you're not, all other creatures have skeletons and muscles and so on, but you don't. You're just kind of a blob of emptiness inside. You have a suspicion that inside, I hope you've never seen this, you have bones. It's kind of an odd thing. We rarely see our bones. We rarely see our muscles. Right? When we do, it sometimes freaks us out, and it might be like a disaster happening because we've been ripped open. Right? But you, for whatever the reasons, our study, our practice, and so on, we begin to realize we have an anatomy. So allow my whole anatomy to settle with the breathing. But then we watched that film yesterday, and we saw these flowing cells arranging themselves as organs and organisms, a fluidity of growing and differentiation, right, that's taking place, right? Making friends with your breathing, invite your entire body to settle into the fullness of what it is. And we saw films of neurons reaching out and making connections, and the glial cells, the nerve cells, sort of caring for and feeding and supporting the neurons, right? And we saw the kind of the reachings and so on of synaptic connection and so on, right? As we organize ourselves, this is going to allow. This is brain. Your brain is like a loofah. It's not just, there are intensifications of brain, and then there's kind of less intense brains. It's kind of like, what I mean by that is like inside our head there's a big blob there. You've got these nexus points, right, where there's ganglia and like a whole lot of neurons are all clumped together. Then you've got other kind of filigree reachings. And that fantastic, I've forgotten what they called it, but the German fellow, I think it was, who figured out how to plasticize human bodies after they died, and we saw this sort of arrangement of bodies, actually of all places in Las Vegas. Yeah, we were waiting to go down the Grand Canyon, and we saw this thing was happening, and we went to see it. And I remember one of the most amazing things was they dissolved all the flesh of the body with the exception of the nerves. And there was this kind of being standing there. It was like a full-size being. And you could see everything, the head, the eyes, the ears, the fingers, everything, just on the basis of, like, the nerves go everywhere. Do you have a brain and a body, or do you have a body brain, like the nerves are kind of stimulating the cells which connect with muscles, which, right? So we're in a comfortable posture, and we're making friends with the breathing, however it is, and we're inviting our entire body brain, right, to settle into the fullness of mystery that it is. This is all we're doing. Right? This is the real preparation, not for the sadhana, but for some extraordinary understanding. Okay? And then we start to see that there is not only an interbeing that's taking place, right? Interbeing of cells, and an interbeing of organs, and interbeing of organ systems, right? But there's an interknowing that's taking place, right? Because each kind of responsiveness that's taking place in our body is a demonstration of knowing in action. Heart knowing blood flow, right? Cell knowing neighbor cell, right? There's like different kind of calcium ion kind of gradients, and there's all kinds of things that are taking place. And so that which knows, the totality of the knowing, we call this mind, right? And you can't quite see where the knowing is separate from the being. The being is a kind of knowing, and the knowing is a kind of hinting at being, right? So we're sitting there inviting our entire body, brain, mind to settle. And this is not necessarily going to speak to all of you, but it's an experience that has been extraordinarily fruitful in my life. And that is that I look at a film like we saw in this film that I'm referring to, or even anatomy books and so on and so forth. And for me, it's like a sadhana, right? And at the beginning, you look at the form out there. So the Chenrezig is sitting in front of you, or the cells are dancing on the screen in front of you, right? But then you do self-arising, not front-arising. You do self-arising practice. This is right, and so it's like you internalize this. I see the image, and then I kind of take it in. Lots of you have worked on this with Tibetan deities, and you visualize Chenrezig or visualize the Samantabhadra form, and alternate between seeing that form out there and then imagining yourself as this form. And you not for a moment do you think that you suddenly develop forearms and become incredibly pale, super anemia, right? To be a white guy, and you got some kind of bump on your head, and it's like really painful. It's got a strange warping of your body, right? Not for a moment do you think that, and yet it can be meaningful somehow to visualize yourself as this kind of manifestation of wisdom and compassion, and a sense of something from that, right? Having a sense of radiating love and well-being to all beings. So too, I have found it just equally as effective of actually contemplating, studying flows of cell differentiation, and then applying it in a sense here. And then I'll sit quietly making friends with my breathing. There's a little bit of thinking. It's experimental. It's a little bit of exploring. Can I do this when I'm walking? Can I do this when I'm standing and sitting, and the kind of classical postures? Can I take this into activity? Can I so translucentize this and become familiar with the translucentizing that I can just carry this into talking and engaging with others without departing? It's not a matter of losing it. You never got it. If you ever lost it, you wouldn't be. So this is just the preparation work, right? Arrange yourself in a comfortable posture, making friends with the breathing. Invite your entire body, brain, mind community. I'm a community of myriad beings, right? And not only are the the kind of messagings happening between the cells and flowing along hormonal gradients. You know, our brain is, we've got wet brains and kind of what you call them, electrical brains or something. You know, so it's like, I think really we're talking about a kind of a web, a communication web. It's called social networking. This is the original social networking, right? So, oh, as soon as you have a feeling over here, bang, everyone else of your friends, all your friends automatically know about it. You post a picture over here, and bang, your feet know about it. Right? Right? It's incredible. And once you signed up, it's really hard to kind of sign out. You know, Facebook has got you forever, right? And so we are also not. Community is a beautiful thing because it makes us realize that not only does it this incredible dancing inside my skin, but as I'm speaking right now, I'm disturbing the air. And the air, this disturbed air, is disturbing the very fine, sensitive film of your eardrum, right? Which is actually then disturbing all the little tiny hairs, right, in the organ of Corti, and right, you know, little kind of curly-hued snails in your side of your head, right? And then this is kind of leading to kind of a whole depolarization of nerve cells, which are like blowing through your whole body. And I'm languaging with you. We are, where do I begin and where you end off and so on. We are community. This is huge. Right? This isn't to hurry through so we can get onto the visualization and the mantra. Right? This is the full Monty right here. Settle into a place of pristine stillness. I would have liked to have settled into a place of pristine settledness, but it was kind of like, wasn't very nice English. Right? And I don't mind stillness, but I have a feeling it could be a very misleading word for many people. Because when I looked at those films of cell differentiation, it looked anything but still. Right? So maybe it's still moving. Oh, you're still moving? Yeah, stillness. Still moving. Right? Settled. Think of it as settled. Right? And vibrantly awake presence, like, you know, like belly responding to texture of clothing, teeth, saliva, tongue, everything's kind of responding to everything else. This is like vibrant, awake responsiveness. Right? There's an aliveness in here, and we're just settled in this. And this is the preparation, right? You're just kind of acclimatized to this. And for some people, this can be 100% their juicy practice. And it can be enhanced by watching films. And it can be enhanced by studying molecular biology. And it can be enhanced, right, by developing skills in arising yoga practice and realizing that that's not a practice which is only to be done with Tibetan deities, but it can be done in all sorts of situations, right? Where we have an understanding, I can't see it, but I have a sense of it. And I know there's a difference of tactile, kinesthetic feeling in my organism when I feel that I am being Chenrezig than on a day when I am feeling like I'm being miserable. They're absolutely, unquestionably different, even though I look in the mirror and it looks like the same guy. Then we come to, after a while, you know, if we get to a point where the preparation for seeing, the third stage of the path, right? Accumulation, integration, seeing, familiarization, no more meditation. These are the sort of 5 classic stages of the path. This is preparation for seeing, for kind of direct knowing. Right? But sometimes this work doesn't quite get us, we kind of got that, but we got like a little bit more. Okay, move on to the next part. Contemplating bodhicitta, smiling, breathing, present. Right now, quickly, smiling, breathing, present. With an expanding appreciation for the spacious, open, interbeing, interknowing nature of all experience. That's back to where I was talking about mind and object of mind. They're the kind of... So nothing really has changed. We're just taking this process, which I found that film tremendously inspiring towards. How many times have you watched it now? I only found it yesterday, but I've watched it 3 times now, right? I just because there's so much in it, like it's not that you spend your whole time watching this, but like take it in, right? And then appreciating this, and then experimenting with that appreciation. If this is the case, then what is that sensation in my elbow? What might it be? And then you have a little word and a little speculation. And you say, well, what would happen with that sensation if I didn't bother with the speculation? So we have now a kind of non-verbal, there's no right way to do this. There's no way you're supposed to be doing this. But we get more skilled in this. We at the beginning, we try to do it correctly. And then gradually we start to ask, is that the correct way to do it? Trying to do it correctly. And then maybe when we do that experimentally, it might lead us to something else. Right? In the midst of this spacious, open, interbeing, interknowing nature of all experience, feel the deep stirring of bodhicitta. Right? A naturally, what do I mean by bodhicitta here? We're talking about a naturally evolving disposition for cultivating, both in ourselves and others, the magnificent human potential for panoramic, multi-realmed awareness and ceaseless compassion and love. And you think of bodhicitta, another way of looking at this is that what I just described is the way a human being can understand and experience bodhicitta. But bodhicitta we could think of as being, what is the oomph that somehow, the kind of structural patterning of cell differentiation that kind of leads this cell to become a zebrafish and leads another cell to become part of a sunflower. You know what I mean? There's a kind of oomph there. Nobody's doing it, right? And it's a manifestation of tremendous awareness for what's going on locally, and also a kind of willingness to engage and collaborate with what's going on locally. That's the wisdom and the compassion, but it's at a kind of complete non-human level. Right? To talk about wisdom and compassion down at the cell level doesn't make a lot of sense. But to talk about a kind of ever-fresh responsiveness, aliveness that does make sense. And is that what that's the kind of that is the wisdom. The compassion part is that kind of willingness, or that factness of collaborating and engaging. Sometimes we collaborate in being apart, and sometimes we collaborate in coming together. But it takes a huge collaboration to practice separation, and it takes a huge collaboration to practice non-separation. Right? Just like if I'm 30,000 billion cells, and you are 30,000 billion cells, and each one of us is all kind of responding to all the other people around, like how many of that? There's a lot of collaboration going on.
To practice the duality, you mean?
Sorry?
to practice separation and practice non-separation.
It takes a huge amount of collaboration. You know, we call it, oh, this is separation. It takes a lot of dancing to do that. It takes a lot of dancing to make a sense, oh, this is non-separation. Right? Can we start to, like, I find, I don't get depressed when I see these swirling indicators of cells differentiating and so on. I find it fills me with wonder and marvel. Right? And so how do you now I'm going back to the very beginning of the class, right? Because I think it's very real for some of us. It's like, you know, how do you deal with the horrors such as what's happening in the Middle East, all over the world? It's not happening in the Middle East. It's being funded and fueled by greed, hatred, and delusion all over the world. It's a global phenomenon kind of thing, right? And I don't find that as the same, I don't find it as wondrous and life uplifting, right? And yet when I find it very horrific, I realize that if I'm really feeling it's horrific, usually at that moment, I'm not actually appreciating these fluid unfoldings that are taking place. This is like, imagine for a moment that we humans are experimenting with how to be sustainable species. It's an experiment. We might not be very successful at it. But maybe through our experimenting we learn to do this. You know, we're kind of a bit more sustainable. Average lifetime of a species is about 2 million years. Humans aren't even close. Right? We might snuff out long before then. But we're experimenting, and we experiment with these things don't work. And these things do work. And sometimes we have the capacity to move towards what does work, as opposed to just dogmatically, repetitively repeating what doesn't work. And so, you know, like to bring this to mind, this kind of extraordinary dance of body, brain, mind community, as it is differentiating and evolving into new forms of relationship. That's you maturing. Right? You didn't differentiate and then you finished and now you just kind of live and have relationships. This kind of process is happening from the very beginning. The beginningless beginning is still going on. Through cultivating this immeasurable, all-encompassing expanse of spontaneous love and clear seeing, may we loosen the hypnosis of samsara. And we're kind of just holding this as a really kind of deep, genuine aspiration, but we're holding it gently. Right? Because otherwise we kind of freak out. And release into the ocean of collaborative creation. May we manifest ways of living that uplift all beings. So we're still doing the preparation work, and the only difference is now there's starting to be a feeling of this flow of life, this life juice, this bodhicitta, right? Which is like really strongly or with increasing strength and vitality, right? Bring this into the world. And then we come to the refuge, right? Within this primordial space of contemplation, we haven't departed from this. We reflect on our deepest sense of groundedness, connectedness, and belonging. Okay? And there's a nice set of verses here that you could use. And today I would like to just draw your attention to another set of verses, which is very, very similar. We were just recently in Queenstown, and I was asked to teach from the Sadhana of Amitabha down there. And this is actually from the Sadhana of Amitabha. And so if you particularly like these as an alternate set of words, very similar but different, you can just download the Sadhana off Green Dharma Treasury. So now here we are, right? Body, brain, mind community settled, right, into this kind of resplendent, fluid, experimental, participating state. Contemplating my teachers and ancestors, along with my human and non-human companions on this path of life unfolding. On behalf of all of us, or all of us together, I take refuge in Buddha. What's that? Pure and total presence. If you like, you could get rid of Buddha. I take refuge in pure and total presence. I take refuge in Dharma. Love, compassion, and clear seeing deepening everywhere. I take refuge in Sangha, the diverse ecology of Bodhisattva activity. The diverse ecology of awakening beings, of the activity of awakening beings, trees, bugs, microorganisms, cells, people, creatures, societies, right? It's a diverse ecology, right? This is Sangha, this is community. This is the real community. Through actively cultivating the six parami, may I be the Sangha, practicing Dharma, realizing the innate Buddha mind for the well-being of everyone. Okay? May I be the Sangha, practicing Dharma, realizing Buddha mind. It's not 1, 2, 3. It's all at the same time. Bang. Okay? Refuge. Right? Making friends with our breathing, inviting the body, brain, mind community to settle into a place of settledness and vibrant awakeness. Smiling, breathing, present, appreciating, right? Expanding our appreciation for the interbeing, inter-knowing nature of this whole extraordinary thing, settling in this. Aspiring, right, to live well for the sake of all beings, and to live in a way that kind of invites beings in a way that's meaningful to them to realize their own rootedness in this mystery. Okay? And then coalescing in refuge, like this is where I belong. This feels like a good place to belong. Okay? I take refuge in worry. I take refuge in fussing. I take refuge in complaining. It doesn't quite equal this, right? This is a little bit sort of more satisfying, if you like, more functional. Okay. So there's a little bit in here. I'll now skip to the end, right? Smiling, breathing, present, appreciating, offering. I deepen this, right? This actual experience, this confident, knowing experience of refuge, of true refuge. And true refuge embraces a lot of not knowing. In fact, a stunning, astronomical, unimaginable amount of not knowing. Because it's in process, and yet we do. Right? And then we finally get to the topic for today. Bodhisattva Vow. Yeah? Now, I'd like to point something out. Bouncing on our movie, right? In the beginning, there was doing. There was activity, right? You know, we see the cells, the movement and everything. This is kind of this activity, right? We could, you know, in other places I've talked about emergent corporeal knowing, right? And then intercorporeal knowing, like the kind of emergence, like autopoietic cell activity, right? And then the kind of collaboration of cells with cells, right? And this is like we see as everywhere, every time we look into a living organism with the correct kind of visualizing equipment, we see this. Okay? I was just mentioning to Mary, like having looked through lots of microscopes and seen lots and lots of films on microscopy, right? I find that I can just sit in the right situation and circumstance, and for example, a nasturtium leaf. And in the morning, the sun was rising; it's very low on the horizon, right? And it comes, the sunlight goes behind the nasturtium leaf, and I'm looking at the nasturtium leaf. There's a big, perfect nasturtium leaf, and I can see all the veins like incredibly clearly on it, right? And I almost feel like I can see the cells. I'm not intellectually convinced that I'm seeing the cells, you know, but because I've kind of looked at this so often, right? It's like you get a sense of this, and then when I see these veins, I can almost see stuff flowing along the veins, right? As this leaf is in a process of growing, and it's a stunning kind of dance of symbiosis and collaboration and so on, right? A lot of doing. In the beginning was doing, right? And then gradually, right, emerges in the human being a sense of an organism in the act of doing, right? So this is kind of, it doesn't suddenly turn on, but it's like you've got a whole bunch of cells, you've got a heart, you've got stomach, you've got kind of organs, livers and so on, right? And then you do an ultrasound and you see the baby in the womb, right, sucking their thumb, right? Or kind of moving away or towards, or like they move. And when they move their shoulder, strangely enough, their hip also moves in a compensating natural way. And when their heart speeds up, something happens to some other metabolic process, right? The whole thing is they're acting as a self, as a kind of increasingly as a kind of an integrated organism, right? And that continues after we're born, right? The sense of self growing. And so the doing gets added to, and it goes, you start off with doing, and then it goes, I do. And there's a kind of, you know, because you reach out and you grab, you know, the big guy's cheek. I don't know if you call it mom or dad or adult or anything, because you don't know at that time. Amazing grip that these little babies have. They grab you, ow, ooh, right? And they're learning to, in a sense, I do, right? And at the beginning, there's just doing, but then they find that if they do it in a certain way, if they kind of do their breathing in a certain way of tensions in the larynx and so on, they can make a certain sound. And if they do it in a certain way, they can make a certain sound that always gets them the carer to come into the room. Brilliant, right? So it's going from just random doing, so to speak, there's all kinds of twitchings and movings of the organism, to I do. And then as we mature, right, it's the sense of self, we gradually develop a sense of I can do. Not just I do in the present, but I can do this, initiate something into the future. Can you see this kind of natural process that might come out of the cells, right? So when we come to this Bodhisattva vow, right? At the beginning, first of all, there's different layers of this, right? At the beginning, you might say it's a kind of vague aspiration. Meet all beings with kindness and interest. Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, I hope I can do that. And touch the difficulties with patience and love. God, it's kind of a bit ridiculous, but I suppose I should. And you kind of, it's an aspiration, right? And you work with this aspiration, but gradually, the aspiration may no longer be so much of an aspiration, and you begin to describe it as a determination, like I'm determined to do this. I don't know if I can. I might even doubt if I can, but I'm determined to give it a go. So it's no longer a bodhisattva aspiration. It's now a bodhisattva determination, right? And then eventually, right, the determination becomes so strong, it becomes like a kind of a statement to yourself and your community. It becomes a vow, right? I will do this. And then gradually, it becomes spontaneous lived experience. In other words, it's just realization. It's not a vow to do this. It's just a recognition that this is what is. This is what I do. And this is, so now we're getting the being we've explored a lot of the doings that are giving rise to us, right? And now we're starting to even more activate I can do. If we're living in a world of collaboration and experimental creation, bringing forth an ecosystem which is perilous, right? Which is so fragile in some ways, and yet at the same time so extraordinarily tenuous, and one feels like life could be snuffed out like this. And at the same time, life is like incredibly tenuous. It just hangs on and hangs on and hangs on, right? Both are factors. Right? And so we start to like, how would I, as a body, brain, mind community, feeling the collaborative nature of this whole thing, recognizing that our refuge is this togetherness mystery that we are, how should I live? What do I do? However innumerable beings are, beings like sensing beings, animate beings, I vow to meet them with kindness and interest. And there's a progression in these. First of all, you're just, okay, I'm at least willing to meet with beings. And then in the second Bodhisattva vow, it gets a little bit more intimate. I'm willing to touch them. And in the third Bodhisattva vow, it gets even more juicy. I'm going to now explore them. And in the last one, I'm now going to surrender into the whole thing. Right? So there's different kinds of progressions that can be seen here. I vow to meet all beings with kindness and interest. And there's kindness is the kind of the love, you might say. Interest is the curiosity, the kind of innate inquisitiveness and curiosity of your own mind, which is very precise and playful at the same time. It's kind of the wisdom side. But someone once pointed out to me that interest was kind of, actually means interbeing, because it's French. You're interest. Right? And so to have interest leads us into to actually collaboratively share, engage, interest. Like we rest together in this happening. No, I'm not interested. We don't rest together in this happening. I'm not, and so actually being is, everything's being a being. A thought is being a thought, a feeling's being a feeling, a speculation is being a speculation. Can I meet all beings with kindness and interest? And I think, what is kindness? It means, well, at least not harming. Right? In a sense, what is this bodhisattva? We go back to, the refuge, and both of these refuge prayers that we had suggested here, the one from the Amitabha and the one in the Samantabhadra, they talk about through developing the 6 perfections. Okay? And so part of the 6 perfections that we're developing is Sila Parami. And you go, well, it's really fundamental. Like, don't kill people. It's not good. You know, stop killing, right? Or, you know, if you want it a bit more refined, right? I will train myself to support and appreciate the lives of all living beings. I will live with a sensitive and responsible awareness for the whole ecology of life. A bodhisattva is someone who effortlessly, spontaneously tends to live like that. They are a bodhisattva, and for those beings, making this vow becomes a juicy, important way of living. Right? I will train myself to use the senses to further awakening, explore Dharma, and to come to know the world more profoundly and more compassionately. I will train myself to communicate in a skillful and compassionate manner. Right? I'll train myself to be ever more directly aware of how nutriment affects the mind and body. I will eat and drink and nurture myself in ways that support awakening. This is Sila Parami, if you like. Right? And when these qualities are actually, you know, through practicing the 6 perfections, through cultivating the 6 perfections, may I be the Sangha practicing the Dharma, realizing Buddha for the sake of all beings. Right? Such a being is what we call bodhisattva. They are in the flow of awakening. They are, right? They are a conscious bodhisattva. Right? This I can do. I can participate in this. Right? And for them, like, to take this vow, like, this is, then you go, well, okay, this is how I tend to work with it, right? It's not like when the chips are down, can I meet these things with kindness and interest? Kindness is from kinda. Kinship. It means we're all brothers and sisters and cousins, and we're all related. What does this mean, to meet all beings with a realization of kinship, like the plant, the beetle, the scary thing, the wonderful thing? You know, this planet, this kind of little jewel-like planet, whirling around a star in some isolated, kind of unimportant arm of a galaxy, in some tiny little cluster of galaxies, in some kind of infinitesimally small little sector of the total universe that the Webb telescope is showing us. We're in this together. We're kinship. Right? Can I meet these beings with kindness and interest? However inexhaustible the states of suffering are. Right? I aspire to, I'm determined to, I vow to, I spontaneously live, right? Touching them, and when I touch them, I'm being touched by them. Right? I can't touch the suffering in Gaza without being touched by the suffering in Gaza. Okay? The only way out of this is like just, you know, pull the blanket over your head and pretend it's not happening. Right? To touch them with patience, right? Patience at root, as I've spoken about before, is like a sense of recognizing everything has its own timing, and love, a kind of willingness to accept the legitimacy of another as they coexist, correlate with you right at this moment, right? Rather than having them to be something else. Sometimes this is really juicy. We can work with this. It's very hard to work with this if we don't feel backed up by that miracle of cell life that's unfolding that we are, this body, brain, mind community that's settled in a world that's there. Then actually taking this and making it a practice is really, it works. Right? It's something we can refer to when we feel we've lost our way. We can just you don't have to go through all 4 of them. You just take one. You might work with it for a day, for a week, for a year. That's what you're working on. And then suddenly one day you discover you've moved to something else. You're working on the second one or the third one. It doesn't even have to be in that order. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them deeply and thoroughly. To explore that which is holding and supporting and mothering and nurturing as it simultaneously holds, supports and mothers and nurtures others. Exploring that with my intellect. Exploring that with my sensitivity. Exploring that with my feelings. Exploring that with my empathy. Exploring that with my physiology. Right? Like to enter into kind of know this feeling of, you remember the Beatles song, my sweet Lord, I really want to see you, I really want to know you, Lord. We were driving down to Mexico. This is I'd only known Rinpoche for 6 weeks, and he invited me to drive him to Mexico, and so we're driving down through the States, and Rinpoche decides that he's going to explore all the AM radio stations, right? As we're going in, so he's twiddling the stations all the time, right? And he comes across, blaring out "My Sweet Lord," right? And then when that came on, he turned up the volume 100%. He just turned it, and it was just pounding out there, right? And I was driving the car, and the tears were streaming down my face, and I really want to know you, Lord. I was like, right? What can we have a passion to kind of know? How do we know? We explore, we engage, and we come to know. And in the process of knowing, we begat. Because in the olden days, knowing meant having sex. So-and-so knew so-and-so and begat so-and-so. Right? And so when you interest with the universe, and something new is begatted out of this, that is the act of knowing birth's newness. I vow to explore them deeply and thoroughly. It's kind of like and then after a while, it's I spontaneously live. I'm just constantly exploring deeper and more thoroughly. And I'm using all my tools, my meditative tools, my kind of intellect tools, the 4 Jungian functions are all happening here. However incomparable the mystery of interbeing, I aspire to surrender within it fully. Not to it, but with it, I'm already it. It's just the whole thing is just like, right? Some days this is extraordinarily meaningful. Other days it's just a kind of a theoretical concept, right? Sometimes I'm determined to surrender. Especially when I'm recognizing that I'm not surrendering. Right? I do surrender. That's the vow. Right? And then there's a realizing of the letting go into the not knowing. Letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go. Not as kind of hopeless despair at the end, but as wondrous surrender into this mystery. And then we look and we see, okay, now is there some kind of action I can take? Do I sign a petition? Do I send some money to so-and-so? Do I march in a group march with a placard? There's no right answer to this. But what I'm saying is you decide on your action from this place. It's utterly different action. It has an utterly different feeling. And when the Vietnam War was on and Thich Nhat Hanh was teaching in America, and at the time there were all these peace marches, and he said to his people wanted to do a peace march, and he said, well, don't do a peace march. He said, walk peacefully. Right? So it's like you're from this place of wonderment, I sign a petition. From this place of wonderment, I make a financial contribution. From this place of wonderment, I write a letter to somebody. From this, right? It's like, it doesn't mean that you're just kind of in this thing and it's like that's it and you don't engage. But you can look at it to engage from a place of desperation and worry and fear, or to engage from a place of bodhisattva-ing, right? Awakening being. This is like awakening of an awakening being, an awakening of being to being. From this day forth, with wisdom and compassion as my lamp and staff, I dedicate all my life energies to the welfare of all beings. And finally, smiling, breathing, present, appreciating, offering. I abide continuously in this heartfelt aspiration, allowing it to become well established and unshakably firm. And this kind of working with the Bodhisattva Vow is it's a lifelong deepening. And just speaking from my own life experience, I mean, this was something I learned about in the very early days. Rinpoche was teaching from the Platform Sutra, the teachings of Huineng, the sixth patriarch, Zen patriarch. And it's one of the earliest texts that mention Bodhisattva Vow. And the way the text expressed it in those days was different than the way I've expressed it here. The way it was expressed in those days was, however innumerable beings are, I vow to save them. However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to extinguish them. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to master them. However incomparable the Buddha truth, I vow to attain it. And I somehow, in the early days, I found that really inspiring. It was just definitely an aspiration. I kind of had a sense of meaning something. It was like a good idea. I wasn't quite sure what it was, right? But gradually, as I worked more and more with it, I thought, well, what on earth does it mean to save beings? How do you save beings? So at that time I lived in Canada, and we had a product called Saran Wrap, and I don't know, a Glad Wrap or something like that. It's like a filmy plastic, and you roll it out in sheets, and you wrap your cheese and sandwiches up in it, and so on. And it's like, then you put it in the fridge. So I figured, like, you got this gigantic thing of Saran Wrap or Glad Wrap, and you wrap people up, and you put them in the fridge, and you save them, for tomorrow, or eat them later, or whatever. What on earth does it mean to save someone? And then I was just imagining someone coming up and offering to save me. I actually had that experience, have you been saved? Right? Well, you just have to kind of be baptized in the name of blah, 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 and you can be saved. Right? And I found myself not wanting to be saved. I wasn't so sure that I was interested in being saved. So I was stuck with the feeling that there was something really meaningful and important here, but somehow the words weren't working. And I realized, like, how can I can save beings by pointing out all their faults and telling them how they can get their act together. And then I thought of someone coming along and pointing out all my faults and telling me to get my act together. And I realized that I'm a bit stroppy, and I tended to kind of, I didn't really achieve this, right? Imagine meeting beings with kindness and interest, and what it's like to be met with kindness and interest, and what that does to you. Brings out your best qualities, right? You know, to extinguish all the suffering. I wasn't sure that it was possible to extinguish the suffering, because it always seems to me there's going to be another moment, right? It's inexhaustible. It goes on and on and on. But I could touch it with patience and love. And that's actually how I extinguish the suffering. I've still got the situation, but when I'm when I'm moving from a place of patience and love, I'm not describing my experience as suffering, right? And I do what can help from that place. Practical, right? Mastery of well, I'm going to master samatha, master vipassana, master mahamudra, master all that. It just sort of like, it felt to me that it appealed to my conceit, right? And I could see that the stronger I got into this I want to master it business, the more I was kind of like just trying to buy into a fantasy of mastery, right? And how do you master it? Well, you master it by exploring it deeply and thoroughly, and having the honesty and the willingness to be transformed in the process of your exploration, so you get changed by your exploring. And finally, you know, I didn't understand, if we're all Buddha nature from the very beginning, how on earth can you attain it? It just didn't make sense to me that you'd attain Buddha nature, right? So you can realize it, and what actually just like surrender into this fullness, right? Hence these words came up for me years ago, actually at the Origin Centre in Western Australia, just for anyone's curiosity, and I worked with them for a long time and found them useful, and then I started sharing them with someone, and then I made the kind of big pompous mistake of putting it into a daily puja book, and then it kind of started to infect other beings, and then there's a lot of people now who think this is the kind of original Bodhisattva Vow. Well, I think if it's meaningful and workable for you, this is a Bodhisattva Vow that can work. If you need to tweak the language, of course you tweak it, right? So that it becomes ultimately juicy and meaningful, right? And then you try and share that with others. And if it works, that's wonderful. And if it doesn't, you've offered your best. Okay? And so this is all I wanted to say about Bodhisattvaing and movies and rugby World Cups and unmentionable, unimaginable suffering. Okay. When you get a feeling for this, you might start to sometimes think that we haven't talked about 4 steps. But we're really talking about one way of being, which is just getting richer and richer and richer, and we're kind of adding to it, and, right? And we can, some days we emphasize this part, some days we emphasize that part, right? There's even an oscillation, if you like, that goes between kind of settledness and activity. You know, in the first one you're invited to kind of settle into a place of vibrant awareness, kind of, that's the stillness. And then the next part is the bodhicitta aspiration, right? That's the movement. And then we come back into the refuge, which is the kind of settledness. And then we go into the Bodhisattva Vow, which is the movement. Stillness and movement have merged in the womb of the uncreated. I praise you, Mahamudra, all existence has your form, right? Stillness and movement, this kind of play. Sometimes our practice feels really active, And sometimes it feels actively passive, so to speak. like there's a and we gradually become more skilled at both of these, and we can emphasize the ones that are most useful for us and for the beings that we're with at that time. Are there any last thoughts or comments or questions? Otherwise, I think that's lots for this morning.
I just wanted to say how useful that was in terms of just a reflection on what's valuable.
I mean, in a sense, cutting to the chase, that's it in a nutshell, is it? What's valuable? And
Thank you.
welcome. So perhaps we can just sit together just for a moment and just allow this space of mystery to expand and to feel your heart sharing this with others. May any merit arising from our studying and practicing and exploring together today in some way help to bring peace in the hearts of all beings, especially the beings in Israel, Palestine, and that part of the world, Ukraine, so many places all over the world. Right? May this wish somehow add something meaningful to all of us. Sarvamangalam. Sadhu. Thank you for joining us. May you all be well, everyone, wherever you are. Good.
Thank you.